Hello everyone and welcome to module number 3 of our quality engineering for new product development and new product introduction related to medical device manufacturing. As you know, I'm quality engineer for new product introductions Andres Relas. Remember that our main course objective is for you to be able to identify the common stages of new product development applied to medical device manufacturing, and that you're able to understand the quality engineer's function during the process flow of new product development and new product introduction. Now, in module number 2, let me just move this over to the side. Here we go. In module number 2, we started talking about the design development plan. Remember that there's a template that you can download showcasing how the design development plan looks. Specifically, we stated that we had to record the user requirements into our DDP, which will stand for as Design Development Plan. Now, what are user requirements in the context of new product development? So when we talk about user requirements, it is going to be the collection of the intended uses described by my end user of this device, okay? Now, as my device design grows and I learn more things about what people want from the device, we will also grow the user requirements in scope and in detail. When we first start recording the user requirements during our initial planning stages of NPD, new product development, it is common for my user to be a little bit vague about what he needs or what he wants. When I actually give him a working prototype and he works with that prototype, he's going to notice more things that he might like or might dislike. But as a basic starting point from a design standpoint and quality standpoint, we ideally want to define 4 key sections. Number 1, what is the device intended use? So the main purpose of this device. What does it need to accomplish? Functional needs. What tasks am I expecting to execute with the device? Performance limits. Is there a target for the accuracy, range, or behavior of the device? And any possible interface concerns. How is the person going to manipulate the device? Is it going to be electrical, automatic, manual? Is it going to have a display so that he can select things? Or is it just going to be like, oh, I calculated it by hand and I type it in by myself? So most users, they're not going to think in these 4 broad categories. But as we go to the design development process and we start redacting user needs, we're going to identify that some mentions or some comments by the user fall into one of these 4 categories. Now, at the beginning, we really don't know much about the actual device. So to learn what my user actually needs, we use one or most of the time all 3 tools that I'm showing here, which are interviews, focus groups, and voice of customer requirements. So usually you start with a couple of interviews, a couple of focus groups, you get your subject matter experts in a room, and you talk about the existing devices and what they are looking for. Now, you might say, well, they're talking about many different devices. Yes, we're going to categorize the requirements, and then marketing is going to decide which one has the most potential. Based on the feedback that we get during those interviews and surveys, we're going to continue designing a certain type of functional medical device. But at the beginning, we're just getting information about what the market actually needs. Now, note, as engineers, we have 2 key concepts, qualitative and quantitative. In this scenario, qualitative is something that you can't actually assign a numerical value to. So it's a little bit hard to say, I liked something. Well, I liked something is, well, it might mean one thing for me, but it might mean something else for Carla or Louis or Carlos. So different people might have different definitions of what liking something and not liking something actually means. As engineers, we always try and quantify things in actual numbers. So from a scale of 0 to 10, how much did you like something? That gives me more information. But at the beginning, engineers, you're just getting feedback from your customer. So don't try and be that methodical about, oh, this is qualitative, this is quantitative. Don't worry about that right now. That will come later. For now, you're just going to focus on your interviews, your focus groups, and your voice of customer templates. Now, how does this work? Well, starting with the actual interview template, let me move this over to the side. Some clients are going to be very vocal about current product shortcomings and what they're looking for. Other clients will be a little bit more subdued. So you'll ask them, hey, what are you looking for? And they'll say, I don't need anything. I mean, I'm good, right? But as you talk to them and as you give them a couple of example questions, you're going to push them to be a little bit more vocal, a little bit telling you a little bit more about what they're looking for. So we must design our current interview template to extract the most information possible and help guide my client to provide the main needs that he currently has. Now, his needs might already be something that somebody else is already selling. It doesn't matter at this point. We're just, trying to get some information about the user basic requirements. So I'm going to give you 4 key questions you might include into your interview template. But again, each company is going to have their own interview template, document. So usually you're going to ask something about a clinical context or environment, such as, what is the primary clinical indication, target patient population, and specific environment where this device needs to be used? So you're asking him, hey, are you working on a particular type of surgery, a particular type of treatment? Is it for children? Is it for adults? Is it for the elderly? Are you going to do it at home treatment? Is it going to be in the hospital? So this key question is regarding clinical context of how the device that he's looking for needs to be used and the environment of where said device is going to be used. Now, additionally, you might ask about functional desire. So what do you want to use this for? So what to use? So you might say, well, you're doing a particular type of surgery. Now, for this particular type of surgery, do you have a time constraint? Does it need to do its function in 20 minutes, 10 minutes? Do you have about an hour? Is there a risk of the user failing or something happening to the device that might impact the surgery? So those basic things, the doctor might not know them, but just asking them might give you some information that you might include into your actual interview results. Now, pain points and risks. So what not to use? You might ask the user, and most likely a doctor, what current device frustrations, user errors, or safety hazards have they experienced that this new design must avoid? So sometimes when you're working in new product development, you're working on an existing product family. So you might already have a certain type of catheter or a certain type of scalpel or a certain type of, bed for surgery, right? And the doctor might tell you, this one is a little bit too tall, it's a little bit too wide, we have issues moving around it, it breaks apart, it's not metal based, we have sterilization concerns. So those type of questions, you're going to find them on Q3, your third question. And now for your fourth question and final most likely question is interface and compatibility. So how is this device physically going to interact with the user, with other equipment, or your standard hospital workflows? If I have a certain device that is really good, but I don't think about how the doctor is going to use it, then nobody's going to buy it. So let's think about how the doctor is going to interface with the device, how it's going to get cleaned, and other possible concerns regarding hospital workflows. Is there somebody that can become an expert on this device, or do we need a simple to use device that can be used by any doctor, even one that only took, let's say, 2 or 3 hours of basic training? So those types of concerns would be addressed on question number 4. Now, you might ask additional questions during your interview, but this becomes a good starting point. Now, before we move over to the next section, I'm going to show you an example document, so just give me a sec. This right here on screen is just an example template, okay? You might have something different at your company. It's perfectly fine. Now, first thing that you can see here is medical device user requirement interview form. It has a project name, who is doing the interview, and who is being interviewed. Now, question number 1, basic, clinical context and environment. So what is the primary use of this device, or where is it going to be used? Well, the doctor might tell you a broad answer, or he might not give you much of an answer. That's perfectly fine. Remember, we're in the initial stages of trying to determine what are the user requirements. This is not going to be the only tool, but you might get a lesson like, we will use this primarily for general abdominal surgeries like laparoscopies to make the initial deep middle incisors through the skin, fat, and fascia. The patient population is general adults. The environment is a highly controlled, sterile operating room, OR, but things get fast paced. There is often blood, irrigation fluid, and gloved hands are always wet. No. So in this scenario, you're getting a little bit of information about where the doctor wants to use the device and specifically for what type of surgery he's trying to use this device for. Now you might go up with a follow-up question. So regarding what you commented, so what specific features, capabilities, or performance are you looking for this device to actually have? He might tell you, you know what, I need absolute tactile feedback because I need to know exactly where the blade is. I must feel the resistance of the tissue layer as I'm cutting so I don't go too deep. So if the blade is really sharp and you're just like, whack, and you're opening up the patient without any concern, that might not be what the doctor is looking for. He wants a clean cut, but he doesn't want to go too deep. The blade must be exceptionally sharp out of the box and hold its edge to thick scar tissue without needing a mid-surgery change. So you might be doing an opening on the patient and then noticing, hey, the blade got dull and all of a sudden I'm hurting the patient. So he doesn't want that. I also prefer a balanced weight in my hand, not too light like cheap plastic, but not heavily fatiguing. So yeah, no doctor wants to grab something and feel like, hey, if I apply too much force to this, it's going to break apart. But at the same time, you don't want something that's 1 or 2 kilograms because you're going to grab it and you're going to get really tired. So from here, remember, we're talking about what he wants. We might not be able to fully deliver on all the concerns, but we are just getting basic information. Now, question 3, pain points. So what current device frustrations, user errors, or safety hazards is he currently experiencing or might not want to experience with the new design? Well, he might say, you know what, just don't give me a slippery handle. I had a lot of problems with slippery elements that are, they're minimally designed. So when I grab it and try and do the incision, all of a sudden, I'm not grabbing it well. So I don't have enough friction between my gloves and the actual scalpel. So when blood gets on smooth metal handles, they rotate on our fingers, which becomes dangerous. And he also hates complicated blade attachment mechanisms. So if somebody has to struggle to snap on the blade, that is a no-go for him because it increases the risk of an accidental scalpel strike injury. So you might decide, we're going to design this as a metal handle with removable and reinsertable tips, right? But if you have that type of mechanism, well, somebody needs to grab the blade, take it out, and place it back in. So he might not want that. We might decide to use something disposable fully where everything gets thrown in the trash. Now, question number 4. How must this device physically interact with the user? You might think, isn't this just asking for a scalpel? No. What is going to be the overall interface and experience? So it has to fit standard surgical glove sizes, 6 to 8, comfortably. It must fit into our standard OR instrument trays and be compatible with standard surgical sharp disposable boxes. If it's reusable, the handle must withstand autoclaving, which is how we do high heat steam sterilization, hundreds of times without degrading. So again, the user is telling me, hey, I'm looking for something like this. It might not be exactly like that. You might decide to do something a little bit different, but that's what I'm looking for right now. So as you can see, these are basic interview questions. Not all doctors are going to be this vocal. Some doctors will just say, just give me something to cut someone, right? But most of the time, you're going to get more information if you ask key leading questions. Now, why is this all important? Well, once you collect all your information, right, we can start to categorize them based on frequency and importance. So how many times did the doctors actually tell me they wanted certain things? And we can now categorize them. With this information, we can start to develop something that we call the Voice of Customer tool, VOC. The Voice of Customer tool might look different, again, depending on your company template or who you took Lean Six Sigma courses from. But in essence, we're trying to quantify the raw voice of the client, what we actually heard, and turn it into an actual design input, which is the real engineering requirement. What is the person actually looking for, right? So somebody might say, I want this for a particular surgery. Yeah, but there are concerns regarding that surgery. So take the raw voice and turn it into actual engineering requirements. So each company will have their own template, but most templates will include some type of the following fields. You have a customer field, a raw voice field, interpreted user need field, design input, and priority field to determine how important that might be to the actual customer. Some customers might say this is important, this is not important. It doesn't really matter. We are just quantifying. We're in the initial stages of product development. So don't be too hard on yourself if you feel like, hey, we don't have much information to go on. Take a deep breath. You're doing fine. Just get all the information, okay? Or as we say, get all the ducks in a row, right? So customer, main field, who said it? So if I want to, reinvestigate something, who actually made certain comments so that I can ask again if I need clarification. Raw voice, what did he exactly say? Interpreted user need. What do I believe based on the raw voice that actually means? And design input. How do we measure success against the voice of customer? So if my customer tells me something and I interpret his need, how do I make sure that the final design actually meets the raw voice of the customer and what I interpreted that it actually meant? And how critical is this? Is this critical to product function? Is it important? Or is it just a nice to have requirement? Now from here, once we finish our voice of customer tool, we will have the complete list of initial design inputs. I will now show you a template of a voice of customer file. So just give me a sec while I open it up. Here we go. This is an example template that your company might have for the voice of customer section. As you can see, we keep recording project name, and on the instructions we said, who said it, what did the user actually say, what do we believe it actually means, how are we going to measure success against the voice of customer, and is it critical, is it important, or is it a nice to have? Now, let's take it a step at a time with an actual example. So I'm going to go back here. Let's open up my example files. Just give me a sec here. Okay, example template. Here we go. So instructions. So maybe I interviewed the actual, surgeon who's doing the surgery. Let's just zoom in a little bit so you can see it better. Now, what did he actually tell me? Well, the current scalpel slips in my hands when my gloves get covered in blood and fluids. So that's what he told me. What does that actually mean? The device must remain stable and secure in wet, gloved hands during surgery. That's what he's actually asking me for. It sounds like it's the same thing, but slightly different. Bear with me. Now, how am I going to measure that the device actually stays on the user's hand during a surgery? Well, we need to handle dynamic friction coefficients of at least 0.6 when wet with a saline solution. So we're going to have a functional design test. This is a test that quality may not have to be doing in line, okay? We're talking about design inputs against design outputs. So during the design development stage, I might, create a prototype. In that prototype, I'm going to place it on a wet saline solution, and then I'm going to do a handle dynamic friction coefficient test. And I want to make sure that the final coefficient is at least 0.6 or greater, so there's enough friction between when somebody grabs it and tries to move it within a wet environment. Now, this is considered to be critical, and it's considered to be a safety risk, because if the scalpel goes flying off, that's going to hurt someone. Now, the operating nurse, so the OR nurse. I am terrified of getting cut when loading or removing the sharp blade from the handle. So if they currently have some type of mechanism where the actual, the actual sharp points of the scalpel are removable, the nurse is telling me that she's terrified of having to do that. So the blade attachment and disposal mechanism must minimize the risk of accidental puncture wounds. So maybe a retractable blade or some type of ejection mechanism where the person doesn't actually have to touch the blade. So how are we going to test for that? Well, we need a 100% tool-less, so there needs to be no tool, hands-free blade ejection mechanism included into the scalpel itself. There needs to be 0 direct finger contact with the sharp edge during removal. So we're trying to, reduce that risk. And this is going to be critical again because it's regulatory and safety. Now the surgeon again might tell me, I need to feel exactly how deep I am cutting through the fat and muscle layers. So what does that actually mean? The handle must transmit tactile feedback and vibration directly from the blade tip to the actual fingers of the user. right? So if the blade, is very, we would say in Spanish, we would say tusk, right? But if the blade absorbs too much vibrations, the doctor might not even feel that he's cutting into the person, right? So the handle must transmit that tactile feedback and vibration directly from the blade tip to the fingers. Now, how do we test for that tactile feedback? Well, we have here handle material must have a Young modulus above 70. So in this scenario, for those of you guys who are not aware, Young modulus is a way for us to quantify the tactile feedback that we get from a certain type of surface. Think of rubber. If you're grabbing a rubber band and trying to push it against a surface, the rubber band is just going to deform, but you're not going to feel it at the other end of your handle, right? On the other hand, if I have a metal surface and I try and push that metal surface against another surface, I will feel that I'm actually feeling friction as I move along. Another example, let me just grab some post-its here real quick. This would have a really low Young modulus number. So if I have this, right, and let's say this is a surface I'm trying to cut, and I just move like this, I'm barely even going to notice that I actually touched something. On the other hand, if I have this, and I try and place it here, I'm going to notice really quickly that there is something exerting external force on my hand. So that's a way for us to quantify. Now, this is considered to be an important feature. It's not critical, but it is something important for the actual user. Now, let me just move this back here. There we go. So we have some space. Now, next up. Now, the surgeon might tell me, hey, cheap plastic scalpels feel like toys. They flex too much when cutting through scar tissue. Now, what does he actually mean? The handle must feel balanced and must not bend under normal downward surgical pressure. And how am I going to challenge that? Well, the handle deflection must be less than 0.5 millimeters under a 15 Newton perpendicular force. And you might tell me at this point, hey, where are you getting like 0.5 millimeters and 15 newtons of force, right? Relax. This is the product development design. So you might change those numbers as you move to actual product development by creating prototypes and testing them on the field. But in essence, what we are saying on this characteristic is if somebody doesn't want something to bend, right, because it feels cheap, okay, one of the main ways that we can challenge that is based on deflection. So if I grab something and I exert a force on it, it might warp slightly depending on its resistance to that force. So for example, I have here a simple hair clip, right? And if I grab this hair clip and exert a small amount of force, right? Let's say 5 newtons of force, maybe, right? You can see that I warped it, and I can exert another 5 newtons of force and warp it back. This, on the other hand, is hard plastic. So if I try and slightly bend it, it might be, on a microscopic scale, it might be warping, but I'm not feeling it, okay? So how do we measure that as engineers? Usually, again, based on the overall deflection against the surface profile. So on GD&T, we have a call out saying, this is the overall total form of my product, right? And we'll talk about that once we get into the actual drawings themselves, right? But this is the actual part itself. So I don't want this to exceed the overall area by more than 0.5 millimeters. So at this point, this is more than 0.5 millimeters, so it does not meet the requirement. I likely won't make, this a scalpel because this is not what the user actually wants. This type of material might actually work enough, but again, I'll have to challenge it based on how much force is 15 newtons of force, right? This is considered to be an important characteristic. Now, another comment based on this scenario might be, we autoclave everything. If the handle gets dull, pitted, or rusty after a few washes, we throw it out. So the reusable components must withstand repeated harsh hospital sterilization cycles without degrading. So the handle must survive a minimum of X amount of autoclave sterilization cycles. And we also specify, as shown here, how an autoclave sterilization cycle works. So it's 134 degrees Celsius at 2.5 bar for 4 minutes, and there must be zero corrosion. Again, those values might change as you move through new product development. But as an engineer and a materials engineer, think about how you would challenge certain characteristics. There is no right or wrong way to do it, just experience. As you learn more of the device, as you make prototypes, and as you challenge them on the field, you're going to learn more things about how to challenge it, and you're going to learn what works and what doesn't work. So let's look at the last example from the surgeon. He says, sometimes I wish I could quickly see a measurement guide right on the handle to estimate incision length. The handle should provide a secondary method for the surgeon to approximate the length of the cut. How are we going to make sure that it actually happens? Well, we might laser etch centimeter markings from 0 to 5 centimeters on the lateral side of the handle, accurate to at least plus minus 0.5 millimeters. So we're providing a possible nice to have on the device. It's not necessary for initial product function based on our understanding of this, but it might become a nice to have. As you can see here, we have now finished quantifying all possible initial voice of customers. So the raw voice has now turned into an interpreted user need, and that user need has now been turned into an actual design input. We also provided initial assessment of the priority, how critical it is to have, important, or nice to have. Let me just go back here over to the slides. There we go. So after we finish this voice of customer tool, we will have the complete list of the initial design inputs. Please remember that this list is going to grow with time and experience. This is just the initial design inputs list. And there you go. You have now completed your initial design inputs assessment for your project based on the user requirements for a medical device. In summary, we first do interviews and questionnaires. Then that information is converted to actual design requirements using a voice of customer tool. This information will then be added over to our design development plan. In the next module, I will show you guys how to complete the team review and move over to your next step during new product development. As always, I'm quality engineer for new product introductions, Andres Reles. I hope you enjoyed this module, and I'll see you guys on module number 4. Thank you, team.